All right, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to another round of Questioning Constructs with me, John, and
And Rebecca, nice to have you guys back. We're
what's going on,
excited.
y'all?
All right.
So, what's up today?
You ready? Okay.
Yes.
So, little story time for you.
Ooh, I love
Uh
story time.
yeah. Okay, so I came across a really random video on Reddit. This isn't what the actual discussion is going to be on, but it like plays into the discussion. So, background. Okay, so found this video where this guy was talking about how it's just so amazing to be on Earth right now and be alive during this time and to meet all the people that he's met because in about 100 years or so we're all not going to be here. And he was saying about how interesting it is that every 100 years like there's just like a different group of people, and sure there's going to be some overlap, but there's periods of time where everyone from that period of time is like no longer living, right? And I just thought it was so interesting. It was a very like wholesome random video, didn't think much of it, but it reminded me, and this is what our fascinating topic, I think, or a fascinating topic to get into would be, have you heard about the man in the desert that is recording history?
No. I
Cool.
mean, I
Okay.
feel like there are a lot of men in deserts recording history. I
What?
feel like, as an
A desert.
archaeologist, I feel like that's a pretty common thing as a male. I think you record a lot of. Actually, I don't know. Archaeologists don't actually record history; they just find it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Actually,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Uncover
I
history.
I think they do both, right? They both uncover and record it, I guess. But anyway, yes,
Fair.
I've heard of men in deserts recording history. But what about this specific man?
So John thinks that desert pastimes for men is recording history. You guys weigh in on this. What do you think? But this specific man in the
Have
desert,
you seen The Mummy?
no, actually. I
That's
think I've
from
seen
the
like,
90s.
I know, I've only seen a part of it.
All right.
Actually, probably where the
Indiana
mummy comes out.
Jones.
Huh?
Indiana Jones.
Parts.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, yeah. Actually,
Tomb
okay, this,
Raider.
yes. That
Okay,
was
okay,
one of my
okay, okay,
favorite
cool.
games.
Cool.
I did have an Indiana Jones game that I never beat. I don't know if any of you remember it. I don't even remember what the title was, but I just remember this giant crocodile in the middle of this temple. And there was like the middle of this pyramid where you had to get a jewel, but you had to jump into water, and there was this massive crocodile, and it terrified me.
There are Indiana Jones fans who are crying right now.
I
Um,
know. I need to go replay it.
but to be fair to you, I have no clue either. I wasn't huge on Indiana Jones growing up. I think it's cool, but it's tertiary kind of cool for me. But
Kind
anyway, continue.
of like the Scorpion King.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so there's this guy in the desert. No one come for me because I cannot pronounce names. But there's two ways that we could potentially pronounce this. One is Jacques or Jacques. You guys tell me. Don't know. But anyways, there's this guy. He's 89 years old. I'm just gonna pronounce it as Jacques. Andre Estelle. And so he created the town of Felicity, which was established in 1986. And he is building these 100, I think it's 100 foot, yeah, 100 foot long granite panels showcasing human history. In case like we either leave the planet, are not here, go extinct, something else comes in, whatever the case may be, he wants to record all of the fantastic moments in human history.
Do you happen to have a link for this?
I do, but I have it pulled up on my phone. So I'll
Oh,
put
dang.
we can put the link in the description of the one article that I have read on it. But uh if you just type in "man in the
Yeah.
desert records human history in California," it'll pop up.
Man in desert. I'm gonna see if I can pull up a picture of this thing you're talking about.
So he has a really interesting history, though. And I have a couple of questions for you, but let me continue to give you the backstory, right? So not only is he building 100 foot monuments, dedicated to human history. He's on the Animals of Earth right now, which is I probably going to extend it or maybe double the size of it. But each of these granite panels, they're supposed to last like 4,000 years. You know, the meticulous in creating these. And the other interesting thing is at the south end of the museum lies a marker denoting what Estelle says is officially the center of the world. So the local county and France's Institute of Géographique National back the claim. So I think it's wild that like we have like a center of Earth. Uh, but his history too is really interesting because he apparently was one of the first people. Again, just read this article. One of the first people to bring sport jumping or parachuting to the U.S. And from my research and diving into skydiving, there is an international institution based in France that kind of controls all of the parameters around like parachuting and like what the sport is. And uh it's pretty big deal if he was the one that actually bring it to the US. He also, I guess, escaped from Nazis back in the day, like wild guy, right? And now he's creating monuments in the desert to human history. So, compiling these two things, I'm sure we're going to go off on so many different directions with this, but I thought it would be a good conversation for us. But compiling the one video where the guy said, "Isn't it crazy how we just have a new batch of people every 100 years?" And this guy in the desert that has what seems to be from this article a good chunk of human history down. My two questions to you, you pick your battle, pick what we're going into today. But the first question is, if you were to look at this in the desert and look at all of human history, do you think that it's going to look that extensive?
No.
And if
That was
okay.
such a short answer. I'm sorry. So I mean, go ahead with your second question, and then I'll address my thoughts
Okay.
here.
All right, guys. Technical issues. We're going to carry forward. So the two questions again. The first is, if you were looking at the entirety of human history with all of these 100-foot monuments, do you think that it would look like we have extensive history? And the second question, given the fact that we kind of cycle through people every 100 of years, let's just say based on this other guy's video, is it really a surprise that we continue repeating history? Like, think about if you were to look at human history for the first time. I mean, the patterns would be very obvious, but maybe it's not so obvious if we just have a whole new batch of people every 100 years. You're bound to make some of the same lessons, even if we do have history to fall back on.
So, for those of you who can see, who are watching this on video, I did go ahead and pull up and the. I don't know if this is your specific article that you're referring to, but I did pull up an article from the BBC in regards to this museum. So I'm kind of cheating when I answer this first one, but it was my initial feeling here, which is no. I don't think that it's going to look very big or extensive, and the biggest reason why is because we're such a blip in time. I mean, if you're looking at specifically human history, and I think if you were to pile it like vertically into towers, where it's like almost like this bookshelf that we can't see the top of. At that point, it feels really big. But again, cheating a little bit, the way this guy has his setup, it's really interesting, this guy's story. So, aside from him building a museum in the middle of a desert dedicated to um, this kind of absurdist art, which is a quote from BBC. Um, all of these panels are excuse me, I lost track of what I was saying. So what's interesting about this guy is he invented the techniques for parachuting,
Mhm.
modern day parachuting.
Yep.
That's freaking wild.
Mhm.
He also served in the military back in World War II, I want to say it was. This guy is really, really interesting, just like as a cursory, from a cursory glance, just skimming over this article. But as far as like human history goes and seeing these panels laid out in this vast desert, it's actually interesting because as I look at this picture on screen, for those of you who are watching who can see it, it feels empty. I
Mhm.
don't know if you can see the picture that I'm sharing as well,
Yeah.
but it feels empty, which is really an interesting thing. And I almost feel like it's almost like an artistic take on the human condition, because we are kind of not necessarily alone. There are other animals inhabiting this planet, there are other insects, things, right? Plants, etc., etc. But there's nothing quite like humans as far as we know so far. Um, so it kind of feels empty, and it kind of feels small looking at it from afar. As far as your secondary question, the idea of the cycling of humans, it kind of makes me think of something completely different but related.
Okay.
And it's something that we've talked about previously. I think as as recent as this past week, um, there's a good chance that not necessarily death comes to an end within our lifetimes, but our lifetimes are severely extended in comparison to what lifetimes have been in recent history. And I say recent history because, again, humans are just a blip on this world. We're such a small amount of time when we talk about time in and of itself. Um, so yeah, it's interesting to think about the idea that if it's true that humans cycle every 100 years, right? Which to this point has been true. Um, that might be something that's coming to an end with generations as soon as ours.
Mm.
Um, it's interesting to think about it, but like even from an economic standpoint, which is what we were talking about earlier in the week, our older population is living far longer than expected, and so they're consuming resources that usually the younger population who's working for is consuming. But now it's not only the working population, it's also this
Yeah.
older generation who
Mhm.
wouldn't be here 20 years
Mhm.
ago, right? Like
Mhm.
they wouldn't exist in the same way.
Mhm.
It's just kind of weird to think about.
Mhm.
I don't know. There's a lot kind of like in this that's kind of
Right?
weird.
Yeah, that's why I thought it would be a really good topic because you and I go so deep into like different areas. And the two things that stood out for me, uh, I like that you pulled up a picture of it in the desert because when you're in the desert, things seem smaller anyways, right? But think about like his career and his perspective as well. And just for myself, while I'm like nowhere close to his accolades or anything, I have gone skydiving before. And when you take yourself out of the normal way that we perceive the world, our environment, it just like does something to your brain where you start thinking differently. And I have to think with the amount of times that he was up in the air, this is almost like the reverse, you know? It's like
That's
you.
that's a really interesting thought, actually. I
Yeah.
I kind of like that. I didn't think about that perspective of consistently seeing it from up above, looking down and
Mhm.
seeing the vastness of the world, and then
Yep.
to start building, which is interesting that he's building out and not up. I
Right.
find that interesting too, that a
Yeah.
lot of what he's building is landscape, not portrait.
Well, and I think too, it's probably beautiful to see from the air too. Like he kind of just gave you, if you're, I haven't been there, but I can imagine that someone standing within the monument, if you visualized enough, it's almost like you would be in the air looking at kind of what's going on. And I'm sure it looks really interesting from above too. Like I wonder if he already had that section of land picked out, or if that was something that he just saw from the air and was like, "That's it." But I also think it's interesting too. I mean, you guys see the pictures if you're visually watching of the monuments and how extensive they are. Wouldn't it be interesting, like to your point, that we are living longer? Wouldn't it be interesting that at a certain point, maybe for a portion of human history, it just that monument gets longer and longer until all of a sudden, you're not uh
You still there?
yeah. Can you see me?
Yeah. So slight technical issues, but it is what it is.
Uh,
But yeah, I mean, all of this is super interesting, and scrolling through these pictures is wild to see.
and
The
something Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Something that catches my eye, that I find interesting, is the fact that this guy has a church that's built on at this museum. I don't know if you've seen or you've caught it in some of these images, but
I don't know if that's the center of the world or like the center that everything's supposed to come out of. So I don't know if it's the
I want to
that
say
pyramid.
I want
There
to
you
say
go.
it's this.
Yeah.
It's this. So he's created almost like this sundial looking
Yeah.
thing, um, where he has these. The best way I can explain it as sideways pillars of pink granite that he's etching onto. And so, in this large circle, he has a total of eight bars kind of laid out with a pyramid in the center, and they're all kind of like it's almost directional, right? North, south, east, west, almost. That's probably better. It looks like a compass more than anything.
Mhm.
Um, and then north is leading to that church, which is wild. That's really interesting.
I also, in reading one of the articles, he was talking about how just the act of transferring something to granite is like a 14-step process. And while he didn't list out all the steps, basically it's almost like old day typewriting from how he explained it, where you are using a CAD software to create all of the visuals, but then you almost have to make like a rubber imprint that then gets like drilled into, or like a rubber overlay that gets drilled into the granite. So I think it's so fascinating that you not knowing anything about how granite items are made, it kind of just, we've come full circle in history where we're still using similar-ish technology or similar methods in order to make our marks.
I think there is something to be said about that. I feel like there's some intention there. I'm wondering if it's a combination of just the resources that are easily available in this part of the world, alongside, you know, I think as I was reading, it made mention of, like I said, absurdist art piece, and I think that really kind of captures the look of it. It feels like art. Um,
Mhm.
and I have to wonder, like, what's his process for recording? What does he choose to record? How does he choose to record
Mhm.
it? Or not how, but how does he make the decision as to what he's going to be doing.
Mhm.
How is he thinking about laying out these pillars? And I'm wondering if this is it this guy here, the mayor of Felicity?
I don't see where?
Oh, it. Oh, you know what? I didn't realize I was on another tab. Um, no wonder. This guy right here. I'm
Yeah.
wondering if that's the guy because he seems like an older gentleman. I'm wondering if he's passing this off to somebody to
Uh,
continue his legacy.
I don't know. That's the same guy I saw in my article as well. Yeah, that's him.
This guy, right?
Well, he established the town. Felicity
Jaquez.
is named after his wife, which I have to assume that that's who's standing right next to him. There's another story apparently of his wife that she was a Sports Illustrated reporter, and so she found him, right? I don't know when this came about, but she apparently was sent to like spy on him, and they ended
Hmm,
up getting married. So
that's cute. I
I
feel like
know.
that's an anime love story right there.
Too, like thinking about how much work he's put into this, because I know in the article that I was reading, it was more of an interview between him and someone who actually went to go check out the monument. And he takes offense to it being called absurd, um, because I think what he's doing, he deems as very important, which who's to say that it won't be in another 200 years? Like,
I
think
don't know
about it,
that.
you
I
know?
don't know that. I don't know that they those two terms preclude each other. I think there are quite a number of things that are absurd, that are absolutely groundbreaking. Like visiting the moon is absolutely absurd. Like the fact that we've put men up there. Skydiving is absurd, right?
I like
But
just flying in general, being in the
flying
air.
is actually I don't. You know what? I feel like it is absurd, but not as crazy. Only because they're birds, right? If there were no birds and there was no concept of being in the air and staying afloat, I think that would be freaking insane, right?
I
Like
still think someone would attempt it. Let's be real. We
at
have
some
wings.
point,
We
at
have
some point,
Yeah,
I
we have
just I wonder how much further into history it would have been. Like if we didn't have birds, at what point in time would we attempt flying to the degree
Ooh.
that it functions,
But the
right?
thing about it too is I'm pretty sure, again, like dates and stuff are not my strong suit, but
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure we still flew before we went to the moon. Wouldn't you say that
Yeah.
might be a natural progression anyways? Like even if there weren't birds that we'd go, okay, well we have to at least get up into the air somehow because the moon would still be there that we could see.
Maybe. I feel like it would take us a lot longer to think those thoughts. I think the progression would be there, but I have to wonder if maybe what would the world look like? Would it be that that in this alternate history timeline, that it takes us until 1990s to
Mm.
really attempt our first travel across the world, right?
Mm.
I doubt it. I doubt. I want to say it would probably be like a little bit earlier, but not by much. I don't know. I don't have any basis for this. This is kind of one of those weird things where it's like all of this is kind of make believe, but I have to think that it would take us just a lot longer. Like, I mean, I just don't
Think
know.
I have a fun question for you then.
Shoot.
So, the car, started first out of like the horse-drawn carriages, right? As a mode of transportation. But what if we got to the moon first? What if we started flying first? Can you imagine how different our world will look like if the
Hmm.
main mode of transportation was flying instead of driving?
Well, let's see. So, what was the year a car was invented? Our modern day understanding of cars.
Probably the
Eighteen
Model
eighty
T.
six.
Okay. Yeah.
So 1886, and then what year was the first flight? So first flight was going to be
You also have another tab.
1903. Yeah, this one I don't have up.
1886
I
and
don't need anybody judging my typing skills.
so, I mean, we're talking about like a 20 some year difference. What is that, like almost 25? Or no,
1886,
1886, that's four,
120.
oh, 86, right?
Yeah, so 120 years of a difference. Um,
Yeah.
that's
That
kind of
is,
wild to think about. I've never
oh my
considered that.
gosh.
Like never considered that.
But think about it too. If we're going based on like we have a whole new group of people approximately every, again, that's not like based in science or anything. It's just off of some guy's video, but like relatively true that like there's cycles every 100 years. Isn't that wild to think that in one generation there was the car, and then in that completely other different group of people, someone was like, I'm gonna fly a plane."
Yeah, I think I, here's the thing, right? My guess is, I mean, it's not a guess. I'm sure there's some factual basis to it. I just can't point to it. But like, how long was the first thought, mechanical thought of like, what do I need to do to try and fly? Like, do you think there were kids in Greece jumping off of buildings because they wanted to be like birds? And they had these like long feathers? Icarus, who flew close to the sun, right? So like we have these Hermes, right, as a deity, right? We have these pointings to the idea of being able to take flight in our history, our mythologies that we tell, right, from history. So I don't think this is a new idea in any sort of way. I would say, like, if we were to really, really consider this, I would bet that the car as a concept is far newer than flight is,
Oh, I could agree with you on that.
right? Like,
Yeah.
if we were to stop and consider, flight probably is something that we've been, as a human species, have been really entangled with um, since forever. Like
Mhm.
I wonder how many Neanderthals saw birds flying and thought, I'm gonna try that as they jump off an iceberg,
Mhm.
right? Like this is kind of one of those things where it's like, especially because imitation is the one of the most base forms of interaction
Mhm.
between people, animals, etc., etc. you know
What if, and to that point too, we've lost a lot of, I think, uh like tribal knowledge and inner very strong knowledge that I think we used to have culturally. I'm wondering if they have like those giant tree root bridges. I think it's in either Malaysia or Indonesia, um, where the trees have grown into bridges and they've cultivated this. I almost wonder if in some of the older cultures, if there was something like, let's say you needed to get from point A to point B, could there have been different models of like what we use as wingsuits today that would have allowed people to just more easily like drop versus having
1
to climb down something?
billion% no.
You don't think so?
um I don't, but I come from it from more of a uh um I don't want to say logical, because I don't really, I'm gonna cage my answer here, right? I don't have any proof of this, but I feel as though if things such as this were to have existed, we would see them in history. I feel like this is not something that would just disappear in terms of inventions. Um, I think it would be far too important to disappear. Like, could you imagine that if somebody developed a way to transport something from high places to low places really, really freaking quickly? I mean, it was the rope, right?
Yeah.
And that's, our basic techniques of how we transfer material with rope from great distances is something that's been passed down from not just generations but like ages of humanity. So it's hard to imagine that some other system has come about that has been lost to time, that would be so influential, right? If it was something smaller, I could see it being lost to time, but something so influential. I mean, like at that point, we're talking about the city of Atlantis that that is, rumored to have been sunk to the sea. You
Well,
know,
I don't think that when I visualized it, it's more of just like per person, right? Not used to transport something that I can't really conceptualize that even if it did occur. But if that was something that occurred back then, I don't really know if we would have it unless there was like a recording of it because it'd all be materials that would have just completely disintegrated at this point. Like it wouldn't have been something to stand the test of time. But like it does make me wonder, like there's so much that we have lost.
well, let me
I
ask
think.
this. Um, because at a certain point in time, if somebody were to see a man flying, right, up until a certain period of time, we would probably look at that person as some kind of god, angel, or deity, right? So there would be a lot of mass recognition up until a certain point in time. After a certain point in time, it would be looked at as some kind of crazy technology. Which could there have been an individual who developed something like this? And maybe he was killed before his time, before his inventions, were discovered. Absolutely, there's absolutely the chance of that. But the I think where I would draw the line of the distinction would be, um, the difference between an individual and a society. I don't think there could be a society unless the entire society was lost to
Th-
time.
Yeah.
In which case, I go back to what I said earlier, which is we're now talking about Atlantis being lost to the sea. That's the equivalent. We're talking about the Aztec treasure hidden in the center of Mesopotamia. Right? Is that right? Is it Mesopotamia and Aztecs? I feel like that's wrong. I feel
Yeah.
like
I
that's
think
super wrong.
yeah.
What is it?
Aztecs and the Incans and the
Where
Mayans
where were
are
the
in
Aztecs?
Central America or Mexico.
Aztecs. I feel dumb. Aztecs, but I'm not gonna front. I feel a little bit dumb for what I was saying with the car and flight because like as soon as I said we've been thinking about flights since like Icarus, and even before that, I realized how silly that comment is about like a car being a recent thing. Heck yeah, cars are super recent.
Well, the
Um,
thing is though, like I don't
Aztec
know. Like I
location,
feel like you could still have an invention like that a
Central
population.
Mexico. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah, that's uh,
uh,
Mesoamerica. That's what I was thinking of. Not
oh,
Mesopotamia,
okay.
Mesoamerica.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking of. Okay, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
The
I'm
whole
not
reason
crazy. I'm just silly.
the whole reason why I was thinking about all of this and how they could potentially have a technology like that, even if it's just like one tribe, right? Because I don't think it would be something that would be widely used, right? That there's only so many places where that would be applicable. I jump off a cliff and I float down. Like Like there's probably not going to be too many places like that. Or, um, if you are using a mode of transportation like that, then it's probably going to be localized. But I did go to Chichen Itza, which is I believe it's Mayan. Ooh, Mayan pyramid that is in Mexico. It's one of the oh gosh, there was like the original seven wonders of the world, and then there's like ancient wonders, and then there's modern wonders. I think is like the three lists right now, and I'm pretty sure it's one of the ancient wonders. But it's one of the only places where I've actually gotten a tour, and just the way that the guide was explaining the culture and the significance of the points of each building and the ceremonies that went on, and how like there was a certain point where we were walking by this like grove of trees, and she pointed out two different ones, and she's like, this one's poisonous, and then right next to it, this one's the antidote. And just all this sort of information that just made me in such awe that we probably had so much information that maybe we don't have a use for today, or maybe it's not relevant. But I just it's always something in my head of like how much we've lost to time that we just didn't know about. So I don't know, I think it is fun to think about those sorts of things. Of for example, too, there's another tribe I saw a video of where the tribe will like sit there and braid. I don't remember what exactly they braid, but like once a year, like all year, they're like braiding these ropes, and then those ropes actually connect over this gorge, and then that's how the tribe gets back and forth. But it's like a cultural thing. I'll have to find the video. I don't even remember which tribe it is, but just certain things like that where I don't know, it could be
So
possible.
what I'll say here is I definitely think that there's something to be said about what you're saying, right? Like the Great Library of is it Alexandria?
Alexandria.
And the burning of that, and how much
Mm.
history and how much
Oh yeah.
information was lost. Like,
Yeah.
so, are there techniques for interacting with the world around us that are lost to time? I definitely think so. Are there, ideas that have been considered that are lost to time?
Mhm.
Absolutely think so. Are there inventions that we never progressed enough to actually physically attempt before it was lost to time?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
100% believe that.
Mhm.
100%. So like I think there are certain things there that I can get down with and feel like, yeah, you know what, there's certain ideas that for sure are gone, and we may never know or never recover or never
Mhm.
think those thoughts again. Which, I mean, that in itself is kind of interesting. Like the idea that there are individuals who can have these thoughts that transcend generations,
Mm.
or even time periods of thinking.
Mm.
Like, again, going back to like the idea of flying, right? When did Da Vinci live? So Da Vinci, right? He lived up until 1519. Is that correct? That's wild.
I mean,
So if we stop and think about that, born April 15th, 1452 in Italy, and died May 2nd, 1519 at 67 years old, which is um, not
probably,
like crazy young, but still,
but good for the time, maybe.
great for the time, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Um, Freaking incredible for the time. What? Yeah. But that said, like, so if we just look at the math here, right? We didn't create a functional flying machine until
Mhm.
how many hundreds of years
Mhm.
after his death?
Mhm.
But we know he had a functional idea of what a flying machine could be. Well, maybe not functional. Functional might be giving too much credence to it, but
But the
the
concept was there.
techniques
Yeah.
that would ultimately lead us, to a flying machine. He developed a bunch of different ideas and thoughts behind it. So, like, if we can say that, and we're talking about a time span of 500 years, right?
Mhm.
19 the 1900s, early 1900s,
Mhm.
right? So 500-year time difference between his death to the first machine, flying machine. Um, what about all the history that was lost before the
Yeah.
burning of Alexandria? When That's an interesting question too. When did that library burn?
And while you're looking that up, just something interesting, I think we're on the concept of an idea can transcend time, because you always hear like we're all connected, you know, everything is leads to everything else, and you're never truly alone. Like if we take all those concepts, what's to say that those ideas, and think about, okay, here's a different concept to relate it to: generational trauma, right? Trauma gets passed down. There's actually, I'm going to segue for a second, so that way I can kind of prove my point with this. But there was a study done on one of the genocides that happened in Africa, where they took a group of women who had made it out of that situation. Some were pregnant, some had kids, and did a really long, extensive study on it where they compared the kids that were alive and made it through to the children that were born after they had completely got it out of that situation. And they found that there was so many genetic similarities and like dispositions of these kids who weren't even born, that would have no like actual physical recollection of that event in time, but yet still carried still carried and acted traumatized as if they had actually lived through it themselves. So this concept of like, if it started with Da Vinci or even before Da Vinci, right? And we cycle through people, maybe some of that just genetically gets passed down and then is kind of like almost rebirthed in a way. I mean, think about wingsuiting. Sure, we have planes and stuff, but someone just decided that, like, yep, I'm just going to make myself into a bat and decide to fly with that one day. Cause like wingsuiting is incredibly technical. So it's just really interesting to think about what you were saying about how ideas transcend time. And I wonder, maybe some of the information that got burned in the library, if we're taking this idea and concept, I'm wondering how much of it we're not going to know actually came from that time period, but could have possibly been saved by people just passing it down. And now we have no way of associating it with that library.
Yeah, I would 100% say there's truth to that, but I think the truth for me will lie more in a physical sense of it, because it looks like these are texts that are coming from a bunch of different places in the world
Hmm.
that this great library kind of housed, which means I'm sure there's information that was just verbally passed off, right?
Hmm.
That probably has made its way in some way, shape, or form to today's day and time. And there's also texts that have been in the library that we have seen. So
Hmm.
like definitely information has come out of, but to your broader point, or more specific, I shouldn't say broader, I should say more specific point about like the idea of genetics, kind of housing some of this information. While I'd be curious to see how much of it actually gets interpreted and passed down within us, I think there's probably a more base concept there that does get passed down, right? Like there's a reason that when it gets dark, and there's no lights out, we get scared, right? There's a reason, and it's not just because us ourselves have experienced it, but this is encoded into our very being from ancient versions of us. Um, this thing where if, there's a loud sound, we are aware and we're conscious of it and we're like on alert, right? Like that's something that's passed down, right? Because technically speaking, I mean, we're just what we were talking about this earlier this week too. The idea that we're just computers, like we're meat computers, right? All we're doing is sending signals through like our different, synapses and stuff. I don't want to be technical. I don't know anything about anything, but we're just these um
Processors.
some would argue poorly processing computers, but we're computers nonetheless, right? We take information, we interpret it, we apply it to the world around us. We give commands to ourselves and we do things, right? Um, so why is it that some of these commands that nobody has taught us, right, exist within us, right? Like
Mhm.
there's certain commands, right? Like that just if somebody makes the sound that sounds like your
Mhm.
sound,
Mhm.
right? You know to respond to it. Babies know to respond to it.
Mhm.
Cats know to respond to it. Like how do we all know, right? And maybe that's a stupid point. I don't know that it is, but maybe
No,
it's like
it's yeah, like things you're
it's such
born
a
with.
basic thing, like because I
Yeah.
mean, again, we are computers, so we're going to work off of basic like patterns, right?
Mhm.
And so you know maybe there's something there. Is it the pattern or is it encoded information in us? Do we just develop the pattern? Maybe we're just ultra good computers.
I think that's going
We
back to the whole,
present.
like, nature versus nurture. Is it something you're born with genetically, as in, like, a uh, deposition disposition? Oh my gosh. Um,
Look
a
at
will to survive
uh,
versus, like, something that you learn pattern-wise in order to survive, like, patterns of society in order to continuously fit in versus, "Oh my gosh, if I step out into the street in front of a car, I'm gonna die," like or just that sixth sense that people get, like, "I shouldn't be here," and then something weird happens or something crazy that, is, gonna harm
there we
them.
go. So like, I guess an example or a thought that comes to mind is like the lightning thing. We were talking about this last week. How like we both felt danger,
Yeah,
right? Danger, Will Robinson, right?
yeah.
In the air before lightning struck.
Mhm,
And I described it as a combination of factors, right? For me, it was the air settling and getting really quiet and then
mhm,
feeling like it was sucked out of
mhm.
like it was a vacuum,
Yep.
a vacuum of air that we existed in, or a vacuum without air, like,
Mhm,
but um, and that was the thing that caused the danger feeling, or like you said, it felt like a sixth sense was going off and it was danger,
mhm.
right? And then you noticed the other things happening around you, right?
Yeah.
Like it's interesting to kind of play with that concept, but I'm gonna pull away from that thought for a second,
Mhm.
and I'm just gonna point out my cute little pillow over there of a cat,
So cute. I was
just
looking
just
at her
chilling.
earlier.
She is just chilling.
Oh,
She's sleeping right now.
what a precious little black void.
She's cute.
I thought that
She's
was her,
she's a
but I
little
didn't wanna
cutie.
interrupt our
Yeah,
conversation.
no, it's just my little pillow over there. That's all that is. That's a pillow. That's not
Aw,
actually a cat. It's a pillow. And my cat is named Cat for all of those people who are interested out there.
I love it.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, why don't we go back to the library, and then I think maybe that'll be a good food for thought to end on?
sure. So I mean, the library is really like interesting. I think At some point in my life, I will probably take some time to actually do some research on this,
Mhm.
because it does seem pretty interesting. Like the different types of texts that were housed within it, and for
Mhm.
how long it stood. Looks like it was started in 3400 BC, and it looks like scholarly curation of literary texts began in 2500 BC.
I think it's
Oh,
interesting too. They say it's not the first of its kind. Like there were other great libraries or great
so
recordings of work.
I was mistaken. 3400 BC was when writing had just begun to develop, which crazy to think about that. Like, so writing developed in 3400 BC. It took us how many thousands of years later to get to the plane? Um, how many lifetimes later to get to a plane, right?
That's wild.
Um, and then I don't know. All of this is kind of wild. The idea of human history, and I'm gonna kind of center back to what we were originally talking about with this guy and his installation. Um, it's wild to think about how much has happened in human history, but I feel like it can be distilled into this small thing. There's a lot there for sure, but I think if you were to look at history and not human history, it would look so small. It would look insignificant, like in terms of like I'm sure there's like a map of time, right, and how much time we've existed on the planet as a picture.
You know what would be also interesting? This would be a huge endeavor, but if someone made one of those infographics showcasing like, for example, like writing first started in 200 BC. And then now here's the whole history of writing, and you got to see the length of time for different histories. I think that that would also be wild when comparing, like, here's flight and what we've done with flight or a car. It's crazy that some of what we've
Well,
been able to do,
it sounds like that's what this guy is trying to do, right?
he's just taking like history as a whole, but he's not like, I was more so meaning like the exact time frame of writing and all that encompasses writing, like that whole length of time. His is more like at this point in time this happened, at this point in time this other event happened, going through some of the pictures. Like it's most moments in time instead of full timelines of a specific event.
So this is kind of an interesting picture. I have no idea what the validity of it is. So caging everything in that, but if humanity were to exist on a clock, a 24-hour clock, how long have humans existed? And it looks like they're determining humans to have existed for 77 seconds.
I'm just
Uh,
curious why they put sexual reproduction at 6 p.m.
hmm.
and we have like jellyfish and like,
So
wait, what?
here's um
Single
I
celled out. Oh, maybe they
so
just mean sexual
that's what it is.
reproduction
Yeah,
for
sexual reproduction in like germs
in cells and
and
okay.
cell.
That
Yeah,
makes
okay.
more sense. I was like,
Yeah.
oldest
Um
fossils.
that's
That's
so interesting. Seaweeds,
humans
um
are like 2 minutes in time, not even.
77 seconds right here. Humans have existed only for
Oh,
77 seconds. That's
you can probably
crazy.
see it better than I can.
Oh, okay. Oh, oh, I'm not on the website here. Dang it. Hold on. Will it let
Yeah,
me
I'm just
go if I
looking at
do
the
this?
clock, man.
Oh man. Oh, hold on, because this is cool. You should absolutely see it. I think you'll get a kick out of seeing it. Hold on. I'm gonna reshare. Which also kind of cool that we can do this.
Hmm.
I think. There we go. So check that out. So here's their determination.
77 seconds.
That's crazy.
Wow.
It's crazy to think about. Yeah.
Abundant
Com-
abandoned iron formations. Battlestar Galactica, unite.
um, yeah, it's wild. I mean, history is wild. I could never study it,
I just love the
but
things that they picked to put on coal swamps. Yep.
yeah, yeah. This is it's pretty wild. I mean, here's a question. If you were gonna map out human history, what would you put on your map?
Oh my gosh. I guess it depends on how detailed I'd want to get, but
Anime,
anime human
Astro
history is
Boy.
told it by anime. That would be wild. Oh my gosh, Japan should make that and put it in I don't know, a park or just as a monument.
What?
Like I feel like they would do such a great artistic job with that. Uh
Wait, do what?
to do human history but in
Oh,
anime.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that would be so cool. I would pay to go see that. That sounds really fascinating.
I think it would be exceptionally cool if it could be a large experiment where you had different manga artists contribute in their style.
That would be cool.
That would be fire. Like
Mm.
you get one chapter of the world, right?
Mhm.
So from this time to this time, draw that in your style. So the I don't know, the dinosaurs, right? Having an interpretation of the dinosaurs.
Mhm.
Or like I don't know,
You know
the
what?
Big Bang.
I have what I would want on the timeline. So I'd want to do I think you could really boil things down as much as you wanted to, but I think I would do key moments in human history, like significant events, right?
Thigh
But
highs.
huh?
What? Go
Okay.
ahead.
Um I don't even know what you said, but anyways.
I said thigh highs.
Oh, no.
That's
No,
get smart on a map.
key moments in human history, but I would find artists. Remember that church in Italy that we sat in? And it just like the sensation of being in there just like evoked emotion.
I cried.
Yeah. I think I would want to find artists across the world who can invoke that emotion and like select the image that would hopefully help us get closer to what that moment in time must have like felt like or embody what being in that moment would have been like. And I feel like I'd want to also, you know how I think it's a traveling museum, but the one where you can go into different rooms and it looks very 3D like and they have like water on the floor or like the room full of lights and it's very sensory. I think I'd
Mm,
want to do something like that as well. There's a lady who paints does all her paintings in the using 3D 4D, I guess you would call it. But I think that that would be really fascinating, finding artists, and then you could encapsulate it whenever our technology gets good enough. So where you're actually standing in the scene, like how wild would it be to actually get a sense and feel of like what it would have felt like to be at those different moments in time? Like,
I mean, we're not far off. I mean,
no,
VR
not
exists
yet.
as is, and you know, more and more we're developing ways to interact with the virtual space, and so I think within our lifetimes, I think it's going to be very likely
Mhm.
that we're going to be able to reach out and touch light and feel it.
Mhm.
Like I think that is a very very likely thing. We're already at a pretty crazy point in AR and VR.
Mhm.
So yeah, what you're saying sounds feasible. It sounds like
Mhm.
it could exist within our time.
I don't know. It's going to give museums, I think, a whole new experience as well. I think people would appreciate history more if you could actually feel the embodiment of history, because a lot of times we think it's just the past and it's
It's
not.
I think it's something that is powerful, and so
Mhm.
I think it's got to be used selectively,
Mhm.
because their history is uncaring. It is very maybe uncaring is the wrong word, because I think history, you know, is does care about who's writing it, but maybe unforgiving. Maybe unforgiving is
Or
a better
maybe
word to describe it.
I would say a
Um,
neutral teacher.
uh, I don't know. There have been some pretty dark times in history that I think would be really scary or difficult to process or put ourselves through. Like, I mean, one of the things that comes to mind is I went to New Orleans with my family,
Mm.
and we were doing a trip around, New Orleans, to the different parts that were affected by Hurricane Katrina,
Mm.
and it was like an audio tour that we were just driving to the different parts in.
Oh wow.
It was like 25 different spots that you go to and you listen. My family made it to spot 3, and we were
Mm.
in tears, including me. Like, it was so heavy and so dark that it was difficult. And I imagine that, like, that's an audio experience.
Mhm.
Like, I don't think I could admit, like, I mean, I think the visuals would be pretty crazy. And I mean, we already have some videos that we can watch that are pretty wild.
Yeah.
But I think if you placed yourselves in, like, what if you were placed in the middle of Pompeii, right? As as the volcano, like, I think there's a power to it. So I think it would have to be very selective and very used in very dynamic ways that like, I don't even know. Maybe VR shouldn't be in museums. maybe, maybe it's too strong. Maybe it's too powerful.
Well, and what I meant by like neutral teacher though is not that history itself is neutral, right? There's both extreme positives and extreme um, dark moments in history. But if you're looking at it to learn, you kind of get to decide what you're pulling out of it. Um, so in that sense, like I think we really do.
Do you think that's a good thing?
Uh, yes and no. I feel like it comes down to our free will and choice. So a lot of times I think we assign positive and neutral to things so easily, way too easily. And we kind of miss the significance of like what is positive and what is negative, and we just kind of pick and choose. But um I also feel like if you're really wanting to learn and you actually are utilizing history for the lesson, because a lot of times we're provided lessons in everyday life and we don't even want to take them, or we see the lesson and we're like, maybe I'll do that, maybe not, or what's more common, nah, I'm gonna do it anyways. So I think it's good that we're given the choice of like how we're going to utilize our information, and that it's not forced one way or the other. But I also think that a lot of times it can be to our own detriment, because our free will, we kind of pick what we want to pick. So,
Yeah, I think we invite so much bias into when we look at information. I mean, even in like our discussion today, we started with this idea, this guy who's got his own system, I'm sure, right?
mm,
But has decided on points of human history to put on a map. And
yeah,
there's no possible way he can record all of it. So
right.
it is a selective process, right?
Yeah.
So we start there, but then look at our own personal conversation. We went from that to the Great Library of Alexandria to
To the human
flying
clock.
machines and Icarus and like the thoughts of museums and interactive
Exhibits.
experiences within them. So like we kind of took this topic and we ran into so many different places that it really does kind of display how like our own thoughts on sometimes you ever get the feeling you say something but you're not saying much of anything because it's it's so intuitive,
Yeah.
right? But
Mhm,
our own concepts, the random things that pop up in our mind, kind of sway us, right? And almost keep us from a middle ground, an
mm,
inherent middle ground, right? And we can do our best to teach our mind to stay focused on the middle, but we naturally sway off the path, and we look for things that will confirm our feelings and our emotions. And so, when I ask that question of, do you think it's a good thing, right, that we get to choose? Undoubtedly, it is, right? Like being able to choose the things that we want to learn and interact with, for sure, are super important. But our ability to stay focused on the central idea or even the truth, the central truth, I'll say, right, or the facts that we can find within this world. It's so hard to reliably stay that course.
mhm,
And so it's interesting because it sends us into so many different directions as people, and some good, some bad, some indifferent. But it definitely makes for an interesting experience. And that's one thing we can say about the world is it's not boring, right?
mhm,
There's nothing boring about this world that we live in. We have the ability to make anything from magic, right? From magic itself, to food that has never been thought of or considered, forms of energy that have never been harvested. Like one thing there is to say is, regardless of whether the information you find is true or not, life is interesting.
well, and I think you've hit on it. It dynamic is the spice of life, if we all just use the middle ground, if we all were always neutral, then we wouldn't have some of these contrasting scenarios. We wouldn't I also think, our own growth would be impacted. We wouldn't get to the point where we had 2 opposing sides of opinion. We'd eventually always get to a middle ground, and sure, that would be a more peaceful, utopic society, I would assume, but the thing about that is a lot of the situations where there is opposition allows for your own personal self-growth. So, like, where would we be? Would we really, like you said, invent the new food, invent
Okay,
the flying machine? Like, that might be
so
it.
I think a good place for us to kind of wrap up here then.
Yeah.
Question, right? Would you choose to take part in Utopia then, based on what you just said? Utopia is going to fulfill all your needs, your
Mhm.
basic needs.
Mhm.
It's going to provide you all of your basic necessities to exist and flourish.
Mhm.
Now, whether you do so or not, that's a I think that's a different discussion. But
Yeah.
Utopia provides for you, if we're going to use this idea, like, if we all could come to some kind of mass agreement with each other and all kind of come together in harmony to do what's best for all of humanity, would you want to be part of Utopia?
I don't think I could do it all the way. I think if we go up some levels, I'd be down. But going all the way to a utopian society, I don't know. I love self growth. I don't like to
Uh,
see a lot of the things that are happening in the world though, so I think,
so
taking some of that out.
I think 1000% I could never be part of. And the
You're
biggest
on the dark
reason
side.
why is I'm way too conspiratorial.
Mm,
So while I don't live in conspiracies or conspiracy theory, um, the idea of some kind of government or some kind of body of people who have developed a society, who are going to take care of all of your basic needs, and you could just do whatever you want, and you can live and grow however you want and just exist. um yeah, that's a cult. like,
but who
that's
says there's gonna be a government if
a
it's a
cult.
fully utopian society?
Maybe not, but it's got to be a mass of people who are inviting you in, right? So even if it's not a
Yeah.
government, like, this city has thousands of people who are just good,
Yeah.
right? And I'm gonna look at that city like them mother duckers are crazy. Like, those people are wild, right? And so I just don't know. I don't know that I could conform enough for Utopia. I don't think
Yeah.
there's a way I could fit into such a thing. I think, yeah, oddly enough, I think struggle kind of is
Mhm.
ingrained into you know existence for me, which is such a weird thing to think about. But yeah, yeah,
That in and of itself is a I feel like we need to explore that in another episode. Like the struggle is ingrained in me because I feel like each person there's a piece of that that just rings true. But
yeah. I think so.
maybe this is a good place to pause.
I think
And
so.
our question for the group, I thought of a really good one.
True.
So, for this utopian society, if it was to spring up, or, the world grows and changes, remember, every 100 years, we kind of have a new group of people or just something new going on. Where do you think utopia would start? Where in the world is it most likely for utopia to grow, build, spring up overnight, however you envision it happening? I think it'd be really interesting to see what people's thoughts are and if people have, or if there's like a consensus, like it's going to be in the
Where
ocean, or
where
it's
do you fall?
for me where I think it
Yeah,
is. Hmm. I'd have to say somewhere in Asia. Just,
interesting.
just with my world travels, I'd have to say somewhere in Asia, probably.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometime in the future I'd like to explore that. Why you think Asia?
Yeah.
But I don't think. Sadly, I'm gonna take the stance. I don't think we're capable as humans. I think there's something innate in human beings that um, seek out um, what would the word be? Not difficulty, not problems. Seek out. I think it starts with an S. The word I'm looking for. I can't remember. But anyway, uh, we seek out these issues, right? So I don't know that one could exist. So if it was going to exist, I would say it would not exist on Earth. It would exist on Mars, with a brand new society.
Oh, that's cool.
Um, yeah, and Martians can figure that out. But I don't know that Earthlings will.
And I do change my answer, by the way. New Zealand, actually.
New Zealand,
Yeah,
that's interesting.
yeah.
That's interesting. The Hobbit people.
The
That's all I
Hobbit
know
people.
about New Zealand.
Facts. So either on planet New Zealand with the hobbits or on Mars. Either sounds
Planet
actually
New Zealand is crazy to think about. It's all Lord of the Rings all the time.
right. I wouldn't be too upset about that. As long as I
Yeah.
lived. As long as I'm a survivor. That's all.
All right, y'all. Well, thank you all for hanging out with us. Thank you for, just watching or listening wherever you're doing so. It was fun talking. Yeah,
Mhm. Always a fun time. Remember, we dive head first, face down into our topics.
that's right. Head first, face down.
Yep.
All right, y'all. Bye.
All right. See you guys.